The best thing about a pile of books. I have just read Notes from Underground by Dostoevsky. I have read it once before, many years ago. What it is all about and what I think about it I will save for our podcast Between Darkness and Light, where we will talk about it. But the old novel has gotten me into the kind of reading that I enjoy the most, which I thought I'd write about in today's blog. It is a reading state where in the middle of a book I get the urge to look for another book, which in turn makes me take out another book, etc. In the end, that first novel has been joined by, in this case, 10 more books. After Notes from Underground, I first of all had to read parts of Dostoevsky's life in Gierkjesta's excellent biography from 1985. Then I read selected parts of Hans Levender's biography, more focused on Fyodor's books, as well as a worn book on the history of Russian literature published in 1918. Then I realized that there were interesting prefaces and afterwords in some of my novels by Fyodor. Then I came to think of a program statement by a Swedish artistuo whose ideas are partly in line with those presented in the novel, and then I read it too. Finally, I found by chance a small edition of the poet Dan Anderson's cultural articles, some of which specifically touched on Dostoevsky. I bought it, of course, and read it. The pile of books that is now in front of me, where all the books revolve around a single novel, is probably what I like best about literature and reading. I can rarely stick to one book at a time. I prefer to wander between the books, sometimes with a clear trail to follow like now, sometimes completely without context and line. When someone asks what I'm reading, I can rarely answer. It seems pretentious and almost a little boastful to list all 10 books I am currently reading. But it's not to brag that I read them, I just can't stick to one at a time. There are too many interesting books. Why wait? But it is best when the journey between the books has a clear track. Where one book gives a memory of a passage in another book, which in turn gives a faint hint that something is interesting on the subject in a third book, etc. This type of reading naturally requires a smaller home library of reasonable width. If you don't own one, a municipal library is a nice alternative. Where you can start at the letter D in the fiction department, let yourself be led onto the philosophy shelf and then wander to cultural history and finally maybe land in theology or why not among the biographies. It's a walk I can highly recommend. Mattias is an editor, author, and illustrator.